Hey, tonight we are going to explore the gentle art of medieval chicken counting, a practice that brought peace to countless village hearts as twilight settled over thatched roofs and cobblestone paths. In the quiet hours before sleep claimed the countryside, when candles flickered in windows and the last embers glowed in hearths, there existed a ritual so tender and methodical that it lulled entire communities into restful slumber. This ancient custom, passed down through generations of farmers and their families, transformed the simple act of tallying poultry into a meditation of gratitude, security, and profound tranquility that prepared the soul for dreams. If this story brings you the same gentle peace it brought to those medieval villages, please consider sharing it with someone who might need a moment of calm tonight. And if you're new to these quiet historical journeys, we'd love to have you subscribe so you never miss these soothing escapes into the past. Your presence here makes these stories come alive. Where are you listening from tonight? Perhaps you're in a cozy bedroom, or maybe you're somewhere far from home, seeking comfort in the familiar rhythm of a gentle voice and an old, old story. Now dim your lights, pull your blankets close, and let the soft hush of medieval evening surround you as we step back in time to a world where the counting of chickens was both practical necessity and sacred ritual. Brother Thomas lifted the heavy wooden latch of the chicken coop with hands that bore the calluses of 30 years tending the monastery grounds. The evening air carried the scent of lavender from the herb gardens and the distant smoke of cooking fires from the village below. His brown woolen robes rustled softly as he stepped into the dim interior of the coop, where shadows danced in the golden light, filtering through small openings near the roof. The chickens had already begun their evening ritual of settling onto their perches, their feathers ruffled and fluffed against the approaching coolness of night. Brother Thomas moved slowly among them, his presence as familiar and comforting to the birds as the rising and setting of the sun. Each chicken had earned its place in his memory through seasons of tending, and he knew them not just by their markings and size, but by their personalities and habits. Matilda, the speckled hen with the crooked tail feather, always chose the perch closest to the door. She had been doing so for 3 years now, ever since a fox had startled her during her first winter at the monastery. The memory of that fright had never left her, and she found comfort in being able to see the exit clearly. Brother Thomas paused beside her perch, noting how her head tucked neatly beneath her wing, and whispered, "One." The word fell into the stillness like a stone dropped into calm water, creating ripples of peace that seemed to spread throughout the coop. The other chickens responded to his voice with soft, contented clucks, the kind of sounds that spoke of safety and routine. Brother Thomas had learned long ago that the counting was as much for them as it was for the monastery's records. The gentle rhythm of his voice, the slow progression from bird to bird, created an atmosphere of profound calm that helped the entire flock settle into peaceful sleep. Beatrice perched 2 spaces over, her black feathers gleaming with hints of green in the fading light. She was the oldest hen in the coop, having survived 6 winters and hatched more chicks than any other bird in the monastery's history. Her eggs were smaller now, but they came with reliable regularity, and Brother Thomas valued her wisdom as much as her productivity. She had taught the younger hens the safe places to forage, and the warning calls that meant danger approached. 2, he said softly, and Beatrice shifted slightly on her perch, settling deeper into her feathers. The third hen, Agnes, had always been the most nervous of the flock. She startled at sudden movements and was the first to sound alarm calls when hawks circled overhead. But here, in the security of the evening coop with Brother Thomas's familiar presence nearby, even Agnes found peace. Her small head turned slightly toward the monk's voice, recognizing the comfort it brought. 3, Brother Thomas counted, and he could see the tension leave Agnes's small body as sleep began to claim her. In the corner perch sat Constance, a russet-colored hen who had arrived at the monastery as a gift from a grateful village family. She had never quite lost her wild instincts, and often spent her days ranging farther from the coop than the others. But as evening approached, some ancient knowledge drew her back to safety, to the familiar routine that had protected chickens for countless generations. Her eyes, bright and alert during the day, now grew heavy with approaching sleep. 4, the monk's voice continued, each number a gentle note in the lullaby of dusk. The counting continued in this peaceful rhythm, each number marking not just a bird accounted for, but a small life safely gathered in for the night. Brother Thomas moved through the coop with practiced grace, his sandaled feet making barely a whisper of sound on the straw-covered floor. The straw itself told stories of the seasons, fresh and golden from the recent harvest, still carrying the scent of summer fields where it had grown tall under the sun. Margaret V, so named because she was the 5th Margaret to live in. This particular coop occupied a middle perch where she could survey her domain. She had established herself as something of a leader among the hens, often being the first to emerge in the morning and the last to seek shelter in the evening. Her brown and white speckled feathers caught the last rays of sunlight streaming through the small windows, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted gently as she breathed. 5, Brother Thomas whispered, and Margaret's head tilted slightly in acknowledgement before she tucked her beak beneath her wing. The monastery bells began their evening call as Brother Thomas continued his count, their bronze voices carrying across the valley and through the stone walls of the religious buildings. The sound blended with his quiet enumeration, creating a symphony of peace that had marked the end of day for generations of monks and chickens alike. This was the hour when the world grew quiet, when the bustle of daily activities gave way to contemplation and rest. Judith sat on a lower perch, her position a matter of choice rather than hierarchy. She preferred to be closer to the ground, perhaps remembering her early days as a chick when the higher perches seemed impossibly far away. Her contentment was evident in the way she had arranged her feathers, each one positioned with care for maximum warmth and comfort. The soft down beneath her outer feathers created an insulation so perfect that she could sleep comfortably even on the coldest nights. 6, Brother Thomas counted, his voice barely above a whisper now, matching the hushed tone that evening brought to all living things. The 7th hen, Celestine, had been named for her unusual blue-black feathers that seemed to hold the colors of the night sky. She possessed a calm temperament that made her a favorite among the novice monks who sometimes helped with the chicken tending. Her presence in the coop seemed to bring peace to the more anxious birds, and Brother Thomas had often observed how the others seemed to settle more quickly when Celestine was among the first to roost. 7, he said, and the word seemed to carry with it all the serenity that Celestine brought to her small world. As the count continued, the light in the coop grew softer and more golden, filtered through the small windows that faced west toward the setting sun. The monks who had built this coop generations ago had positioned it with care, ensuring that the chickens would receive the warming rays of morning sun and be sheltered from the harsh winds that sometimes swept down from the mountains. Every detail had been considered with the same attention to spiritual practice that the monks brought to their prayers and meditations. Philippa, the 8th hen, had recently begun showing signs of age. Her movements were slower now, more deliberate, and she required a lower perch that would be easier for her to reach. Brother Thomas had noticed these changes and had carefully adjusted her living arrangements, ensuring that she could maintain her dignity while receiving the accommodation she needed. Her eggs came less frequently now, but they were still treasured for their rich flavor and golden yolks. 8, he counted, and his voice carried with it a note of particular tenderness for this faithful bird who had given so much to the monastery community. The 9th position belonged to Teresa, a relatively young hen whose energy and curiosity kept her active throughout the day. She was often the first to investigate new additions to their pen, and the most likely to venture into unexplored corners of their territory. But as evening approached, even her adventurous spirit yielded to the ancient rhythms of rest. Her head bobbed slightly as sleep began to claim her, and her breathing grew deeper and more regular. 9, Brother Thomas said, and the words seemed to anchor her to the peaceful moment. Dorothy, the 10th hen, had an unusual habit of arranging small stones and twigs near her perch, creating what appeared to be decorative patterns. No one understood this behavior, but Brother Thomas had learned to appreciate the simple beauty of her arrangements. They seemed to speak to some aesthetic sense that transcended the practical concerns of survival, suggesting that even chickens possessed some capacity for creating beauty. Her perch area was always the most carefully maintained, as if she took pride in her surroundings. 10, the monk whispered, honoring both the bird and her mysterious artistic inclinations. The counting rhythm had become a meditation for Brother Thomas, each number a step deeper into the contemplative state that marked the transition from day to night. His breathing had synchronized with the peaceful sounds of the settling flock, and his movements had taken on the flowing quality of a sacred dance. This was more than inventory. It was a practice that connected him to the cycles of nature and the simple, profound satisfaction of caring for other living beings. Scholastica, the 11th hen, bore a name that reflected the monastery's dedication to learning and wisdom. She had demonstrated remarkable intelligence in her ability to solve problems and remember complex routes to favorite foraging spots. Her eggs often appeared in unexpected places, evidence of her ability to find hidden nesting spots that provided extra security. Brother Thomas valued her cleverness and had often wondered what thoughts might occupy the mind of such an obviously intelligent creature. 11, he counted, and Scholastica's bright eye caught his for a moment before she settled into sleep. The Fae, 12th hen, Bernadette, had arrived at the monastery under unusual circumstances. She had been found as a chick, abandoned and alone, during a spring storm. Brother Thomas had nursed her through her early weeks, feeding her by hand and keeping her warm with a small blanket near the kitchen hearth. Perhaps because of this early closeness, she had always been the most trusting of the flock, often approaching humans without fear and seeming to seek out companionship. 12, he said, and his voice carried the warmth of remembered care and continuing affection. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, the light in the coop shifted from gold to amber, creating an atmosphere of profound tranquility. The temperature had begun to drop, but the chickens were well adapted to these changes, their feathers providing insulation that would keep them comfortable through the night. Brother Thomas could hear the sounds of the monastery settling into evening routine, distant conversations growing quieter, the soft footsteps of monks making their way to evening prayers, the gentle closing of doors as the community prepared for the peaceful hours ahead. Gertrude, the 13th hen, occupied a corner perch that gave her a view of both the interior of the coop and the small windows that looked out toward the monastery gardens. She seemed to enjoy watching the changing light and shadows, often remaining alert longer than the others, as if reluctant to miss any detail of the evening's progression. Her patience and observational skills had made her an excellent mother. During her brooding seasons, always alert to potential dangers while maintaining the calm presence necessary for successful hatching. 13, Brother Thomas counted, acknowledging her vigilant nature even as she began to relax into sleep. The 14th hen, Winifred, had a distinctive red comb that caught the light even in the dim interior of the coop. She had always been robust and healthy, rarely showing signs of illness or distress. Her consistent egg production and steady temperament made her a valuable member of the flock, one whose presence could be counted on through all seasons and circumstances. Her reliability had become a source of comfort to Brother Thomas, who had learned to appreciate the peace that came from predictable routine. 14, he whispered, and Winifred's contentment seemed to radiate outward, contributing to the overall sense of calm that filled the coop. Catherine, the 15th hen, had been named for a saint known for her wisdom and spiritual insight. Whether by coincidence or some deeper connection, this Catherine had developed a remarkable ability to sense changes in weather before they became apparent to human observers. She would often seek shelter hours before storms arrived and seemed to know instinctively when the seasons were about to change. Brother Thomas had learned to pay attention to her behavior as a guide for his own preparations. 15, he counted, grateful for the mysterious knowledge she brought to their small community. The 16th hen, Ursula, had distinctive black and white markings that reminded Brother Thomas of the manuscripts he had illuminated during his younger years as a scribe. The intricate patterns of her feathers seemed almost deliberately designed, each mark perfectly placed to create a harmonious whole. She moved with a grace that suggested awareness of her own beauty, but without vanity, simply with the natural dignity that came from being perfectly adapted to her environment. 16, he said, and the word carried appreciation for the artistry that nature displayed even in the humblest of creatures. As the count progressed into the high numbers, Brother Thomas felt his own spirit settling into the peaceful rhythm that would prepare him for evening prayers and eventual sleep. The simple act of ensuring that each bird was safe and accounted for created a sense of completion that marked the successful end of another day. This ritual connected him to shepherds and farmers throughout history who had performed similar counts, creating an unbroken chain of care that stretched back to the earliest days of human domestication of animals. Perpetua, the 17th hen, had earned her name through her persistence in all things. When she decided to brood, nothing could convince her to abandon her nest. When she found a particularly good foraging spot, she would return to it day after day until every seed and insect had been discovered. This determination had made her an excellent mother and a productive member of the flock. Her dedication to her purposes reminded Brother Thomas of the importance of persistence in spiritual practice, of returning again and again to the disciplines that nurtured growth and understanding. 17, he counted, honoring her steadfast nature. The 18th hen, Agatha, had survived a hawk attack during her first year, an experience that had left her with a permanent limp but had not diminished her spirit. She had adapted to her limitation with remarkable resilience, finding new ways to move and forage that accommodated her injury. Her courage in continuing to live fully despite her challenges had inspired Brother Thomas during his own difficult periods, reminding him that obstacles could be overcome through patience and creative adaptation. 18, he said, and his voice carried deep respect for her strength. Lucy, the 19th hen, had been born during the darkest month of winter, when snow covered the monastery grounds and the days seemed to consist more of night than daylight. Perhaps because of this timing, she had always seemed particularly attuned to the subtle changes in light that marked the progression of days and seasons. She was often the first to respond to the earliest hints of dawn and the last to settle as evening approached, as if she were determined to experience every moment of available light. 19, Brother Thomas whispered, appreciating her attention to the gifts that each day brought. The 20th hen, Felicity, bore a name that perfectly matched her disposition. She seemed to approach each day with enthusiasm and joy, greeting the morning with vigorous scratching and clucking, exploring her environment with obvious pleasure, and settling into evening with the satisfaction of a day well lived. Her positive energy had a contagious effect on the other birds, and Brother Thomas had noticed that the entire flock seemed more content when Felicity was present and healthy. 20, he counted, and the word carried gratitude for the reminder that joy could be found in the simplest activities. As the evening deepened and the last light began to fade from the windows, Brother Thomas could hear the night sounds beginning outside the coop. Owls called from the forest beyond the monastery walls, their voices weaving together in harmonies that had marked the transition to night for countless generations. The sound of wind moving through the trees added its own gentle music, creating the natural lullaby that would accompany the sleep of all the monastery's inhabitants, both human and animal. The 21st hen, Prudence, had always demonstrated remarkable judgment in her choices of where to forage, when to seek shelter, and how to interact with the other birds in the flock. She seemed to possess an innate wisdom that guided her away from danger and toward opportunity. Her decision-making abilities had made her a natural leader among the younger hens, who often followed her example when faced with unfamiliar situations. Brother Thomas had learned to trust her instincts and often used her behavior as a guide for his own assessment of conditions in and around the co-op. 21, he said, acknowledging the wisdom she brought to their small community. Veronica, the 22nd hen, had distinctive golden feathers that seemed to glow with their own internal light. During the summer months, when the sun was strongest, these feathers would catch and hold the light in ways that made her appear almost luminous. Brother Thomas had often found himself pausing in his work simply to appreciate the beauty she brought to ordinary moments. Her presence served as a reminder that the divine could be glimpsed in the most humble circumstances, that glory could manifest in the simple reality of feathers catching sunlight. 22, he counted, and the word carried wonder at the unexpected beauty that surrounded him daily. The 23rd hen, Patience, had earned her name through her willingness to wait calmly for her turn at the feeding stations, to sit quietly on her nest for the full duration of incubation, and to approach all situations with serene acceptance of their natural timing. Her example had taught Brother Thomas valuable lessons about the spiritual discipline of patience, about trusting in the natural unfolding of events rather than trying to force outcomes through anxious effort. 23, he whispered, grateful for the gentle teaching she provided simply through being herself. Hope, the 24th hen, had been hatched during a particularly difficult spring when disease had threatened the flock and the monastery's food supplies were running low. Her successful hatching and healthy growth had seemed like a promise that better times lay ahead, and indeed the remainder of that year had brought abundant harvests and renewed prosperity. Whether through coincidence or some deeper connection, her presence had become associated with optimism and faith in the future. 24, Brother Thomas said, and the word carried gratitude for the reminder that even in difficult circumstances, new life and possibility continued to emerge. The 25th hen, Charity, had an unusual habit of sharing choice food discoveries with the other birds in the flock, calling them over to particularly rich foraging spots, rather than keeping the bounty for herself. This generous spirit had created a more cooperative atmosphere among the chickens, reducing competition and conflict. Brother Thomas had often reflected on the lessons her behavior offered about the benefits of generosity and the way that sharing abundance created more abundance for everyone. 25, he counted, honoring the spirit of giving that she embodied. As the count neared its completion, Brother Thomas felt the deep satisfaction that came from this daily ritual of care and attention. Each bird represented not just livestock to be managed, but an individual life that had been entrusted to his stewardship. The responsibility was both humbling and enriching, connecting him to the fundamental rhythms of life and death, growth and rest, community and solitude that shaped all existence. The 26th and final hen, Serenity, occupied the highest perch in the coop, a position she had claimed through her calm authority rather than aggressive dominance. She had never been seen to engage in the pecking and squabbling that sometimes occurred among the others, yet her presence commanded respect from the entire flock. Her ability to remain peaceful in all circumstances had made her a stabilizing influence on the group dynamics, and Brother Thomas had often marveled at the wisdom that seemed to radiate from her small form. 26, he said, and with that final number, the count was complete. The silence that followed the completion of the count was profound and peaceful, filled with the quiet sounds of sleeping chickens and the distant murmur of evening prayers beginning in the monastery chapel. Brother Thomas stood for a moment in the gathering darkness, feeling the satisfaction of another day's responsibilities fulfilled and another night's security established. The chickens were safe, accounted for, and settling into the restorative sleep that would prepare them for the adventures and activities of the coming day. As he prepared to leave the coop, Brother Thomas offered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the privilege of caring for these creatures, for the lessons they taught through their simple presence, and for the peace that came from participating in the ancient rhythms of pastoral life. The latching of the coop door marked the completion of his evening duties, but the sense of connection and purpose would remain with him through his own prayers and sleep. The monastery bells rang the hour as Brother Thomas made his way across the courtyard toward the chapel, where his fellow monks were gathering for evening prayers. Above him, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and in the coop behind him, 26 chickens settled into peaceful sleep, each one safely counted and tenderly cared for, each one a small but precious part of the great web of life that connected all living things in bonds of mutual dependence and care. The practice of counting chickens before sleep would continue for countless generations, carried forward by other monks, other farmers, other caretakers who understood that the simple act of ensuring safety and expressing gratitude was itself a form of prayer, a way of honoring the trust that had been placed in human hands to care for the vulnerable creatures that shared our world. As this chapter closes its eyes, another tale begins to stir, and in the mist of dreams, a new story of gentle medieval days whispers softly into being. In cloistered courtyards where evening bells chime softly, gentle brothers move among feathered companions with practiced reverence. Here, in the fading light of medieval days, sacred counting transforms the simple task of poultry keeping into a meditation of divine order and earthly stewardship. Brother Thomas adjusted his woolen habit against the cool evening air as he stepped into the monastery's chicken yard, the familiar scent of straw and earth greeting him like an old friend. The bells of Vespers had just finished their melodic call across the valley, and now came the time for the sacred counting, a ritual as old as the monastery itself. In his weathered hands, he carried a small wooden tablet, marked with careful notches, each one representing the precious lives entrusted to his care. The evening light filtered through the apple trees that bordered the enclosure, casting dancing shadows across the ground where 27 hens pecked quietly at scattered grain. Brother Thomas had known each bird since their hatching, could recognize them by the subtle differences in their feathering, the particular tilt of their heads, the rhythm of their gentle clucking. There was Seraphina, the rust-colored hen who always roosted closest to the chapel wall, as if drawn to the prayers that drifted through the stones. Beside her, Agatha, a plump white bird with a single black feather on her tail, scratched methodically in the soft earth. The practice of counting the monastery's chickens at twilight had begun 3 centuries earlier, when Brother Aldrich, the abbey's first fowl keeper, had noticed that the evening hour brought a natural settling to the birds. As the daylight faded and the cool air descended from the surrounding hills, the hens would gather closer together, their movements becoming slower and more deliberate. It was during this tranquil time that an accurate count could be taken, ensuring that none had wandered beyond the safety of the enclosure or fallen prey to the foxes that sometimes emerged from the dark forest. Brother Thomas began his count with the same prayer his predecessors had whispered for generations. "Blessed Creator," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the soft rustling of feathers. grant me eyes to see each life you have placed in my keeping, and hands gentle enough to tend them with the care they deserve." The words flowed like water over worn stones, smooth and familiar, carrying with them the weight of centuries of devotion. One by one, he approached each hen, speaking her name in the same gentle tone he might use for a fellow brother. "Good evening, Seraphina," he whispered, making the first mark on his tablet. The hen looked up at him with bright, curious eyes, as if acknowledging the greeting. "Peace be with you, Agatha," he continued, moving to the next bird with steps so soft they barely disturbed the scattered straw beneath his sandaled feet. The monastery had developed its own method for this evening ritual, refined over generations, of careful observation and patient practice. Each hen was given a name upon arrival, usually that of a saint or a virtue the brothers wished to cultivate. The names were recorded in a thick leather ledger kept in the scriptorium, written in the same careful script used for copying sacred texts. Brother Thomas often reflected on how this simple task connected him to the great chain of monastic life, where even the smallest responsibilities were treated with reverence and attention. As he moved through the yard, Brother Thomas noticed the subtle changes that marked the transition from day to night. The air grew cooler, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke from the kitchen fires and the distant fragrance of wild herbs growing along the monastery walls. The light shifted from gold to amber to the deep blue of approaching dusk, and with each passing moment, the hens seemed to sense the coming of roosting time. Prudence, a speckled hen with a particularly melodious cluck, had already begun making her way toward the wooden coop that stood against the southern wall of the yard. The structure had been built by Brother Marcus, the monastery carpenter, using oak timbers salvaged from a storm-felled tree in the abbey's forest. Its design followed principles passed down from the early fathers of the order with careful attention to ventilation, protection from predators, and ease of cleaning. The counting continued with meditative precision. 15, 16, 17. Each number was spoken aloud in Latin, the ancient language lending gravity to the simple task. Quindecim, sedecim, septendecim. Brother Thomas had learned these numbers as a young novice, practicing them in the cool stone corridors of the monastery until they became as natural as breathing. The Latin words seemed to hover in the evening air like incense, transforming the mundane act of inventory into something approaching prayer. Near the far corner of the enclosure, where a small stream provided fresh water for the birds, Brother Thomas found Charity engaged in her evening drink. The dark-feathered hen dipped her beak into the clear water with delicate precision, lifting her head to let each drop flow down her throat. The stream itself was another marvel of monastic engineering, diverted from a spring high in the hills through a series of carefully maintained channels that brought fresh water not only to the chicken yard, but to the herb gardens, the kitchen, and the fountain in the cloister. The monastery's approach to chicken keeping reflected the broader philosophy of the order, which emphasized balance, sustainability, and mindful stewardship of all resources. The birds were fed primarily on grain grown in the abbey's own fields, supplemented with kitchen scraps and forage from the surrounding meadows. Their eggs provided protein for the brothers' meals, while their droppings enriched the soil of the vegetable gardens. Nothing was wasted, and every aspect of their care was considered with the same attention given to the copying of manuscripts or the tending of the altar. As Brother Thomas continued his count, he remembered the teachings of Brother Benedictus, the elderly monk who had trained him in the arts of animal husbandry. To count God's creatures, the old brother had said, is to number the gifts of his providence. Each bird is a blessing, each egg a miracle of creation. We are not masters here, but servants, called to protect and nurture what has been entrusted to our care. 21, 22, 23. The numbers mounted steadily as Brother Thomas worked his way through the flock. Some hens had already begun settling into their preferred roosting spots, fluffing their feathers and tucking their heads in preparation for sleep. Others continued their final foraging of the day, searching for seeds or insects overlooked during their earlier explorations. The diversity of their behaviors reminded Brother Thomas of his fellow monks, each with his own rhythms and preferences, yet all part of the same community. The evening counting served multiple purposes beyond simple inventory. It was an opportunity to observe each bird closely, checking for signs of illness or injury that might require attention. Brother Thomas had developed an eye for the subtle indicators of poultry health: the brightness of eyes, the condition of feathers, the quality of movement. A hen that seemed listless or showed changes in appetite would be separated from the flock and given special care in the small infirmary pen adjacent to the main enclosure. During his years as fowl keeper, Brother Thomas had treated birds for various ailments using remedies recorded in the monastery's collection of practical manuscripts. These texts, copied and preserved alongside theological works, contained generations of accumulated wisdom about agriculture, animal husbandry, and herbal medicine. For a hen with respiratory troubles, he might prepare a steam treatment using herbs from the monastery garden. For digestive issues, he had learned to mix certain crushed seeds with the bird's regular feed. The approach to healing reflected the holistic worldview of the monastic community, where physical, spiritual, and emotional well-being were seen as interconnected. Just as the brothers cared for their own souls through prayer, study, and mutual support, so too did they tend to the complete welfare of the creatures in their charge. This philosophy extended to every aspect of monastery life, from the cultivation of herbs to the brewing of ale, from the copying of books to the education of novices. As the count progressed toward its conclusion, Brother Thomas reflected on the changes he had witnessed during his tenure as fowl keeper. New hens had arrived as chicks, grown to maturity, and eventually passed to their eternal rest. He had learned to accept these cycles of life and death as part of the divine plan, celebrating the productivity and companionship each bird brought, while releasing them with gratitude when their time came to an end. 25, 26, 27. The final count matched the number recorded in the previous evening's tally, bringing a quiet satisfaction to Brother Thomas's heart. All were present and accounted for, safe within the protection of the monastery walls, as another day drew to its close. He made the final mark on his wooden tablet, then stood for a moment in silent appreciation of the scene before him. The hens had almost all found their roosting places now, settling onto the wooden perches inside the coop, or finding comfortable spots among the straw. Their soft, murmuring voices created a gentle symphony of contentment. punctuated by the occasional rustle of feathers as they adjusted their positions. In the distance, the bell tower stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its familiar outline a reminder of the eternal rhythms that governed monastic life. Brother Thomas began the process of securing the enclosure for the night, checking the latches on the gates and ensuring that the wooden shutters of the coop were properly positioned to provide protection from wind while allowing adequate airflow. These nightly preparations had become second nature to him, performed with the same careful attention he brought to all his duties. The safety and comfort of the birds were paramount, especially during the vulnerable hours of darkness when predators might emerge from the surrounding wilderness. The monastery's location in a valley surrounded by forests and hills provided natural beauty and abundant resources, but it also presented challenges for those charged with protecting domestic animals. Foxes, martens, and occasionally wolves roamed the area after dark, drawn by the scent of easy prey. The chicken enclosure had been designed with these threats in mind, featuring high wooden fences reinforced with thorny brambles and a series of protective barriers that discouraged unauthorized entry. As he completed his evening tasks, Brother Thomas offered a final prayer of thanksgiving for the day's peaceful conclusion. "Gracious Father," he whispered, "we commend to your protection these gentle creatures and all who dwell within these walls. Grant us peaceful rest and the blessing of another day to serve in your name." The words seemed to blend with the settling sounds of the chickens and the distant chanting that drifted from the chapel, where the brothers were concluding their evening prayers. The practice of evening chicken counting had become more than a practical necessity. It was a form of meditation that helped Brother Thomas transition from the active work of the day to the restful quiet of night. As he walked the familiar paths of the enclosure, speaking gentle words to each bird, he felt his own spirit settling into the rhythm of approaching sleep. The simple repetition of names and numbers created a peaceful cadence that calmed both mind and heart. With his duties complete, Brother Thomas extinguished the small lantern he had brought to illuminate his work and made his way back toward the main buildings of the monastery. Behind him, the chicken yard settled into the tranquil silence of night, protected by ancient walls and watched over by the same divine providence that had guided the community for countless generations. The wooden tablet in his hand bore the marks of another successful count, a small but significant record in the ongoing story of monastic life. In the scriptorium, he would transfer the evening's tally to the permanent ledger, adding it to the long columns of numbers that stretched back through years and decades. These records served not only as practical documentation, but as a testament to the continuity of monastic tradition, where even the simplest tasks were performed with devotion and recorded with care. Future generations of brothers would look back on these pages and see the evidence of faithful stewardship, carried out one peaceful evening at a time. The monastery bells chimed the hour of compline as Brother Thomas entered the stone corridors of the main building, his sandals making soft echoes against the worn floors. Soon he would join his brothers in the chapel for the final prayers of the day, adding his voice to the ancient songs that had been sung in this place for centuries. But first, there was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that his particular charges were safe and accounted for, settled into their roosts as peacefully as the brothers themselves would soon settle into their cells. In the chicken yard, 27. Hens drowsed on their perches, their soft breathing creating gentle rhythms in the cooling air. Above them, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The same stars that had watched over countless generations of monks and their feathered companions. The evening count was complete. Another small but meaningful chapter in the endless story of monastic life, where sacred and mundane intertwined in the patient service of divine love. As the monastery settles into the embrace of night, another tale unfolds in distant corridors of time, where different voices whisper of counted blessings. In the shadow of ancient stone towers, where torchlight danced upon weathered walls, there lived a tradition as old as the castles themselves. Here, within these noble walls, the gentle evening ritual of counting fowl created a lullaby of numbers that whispered through courtyards like a prayer. Lady Marguerite de Montclair moved through the castle's inner courtyard with the grace of one born to these ancient stones. The evening mist had begun to settle over the battlements, and the last rays of sunlight painted the cobblestones in shades of amber and gold. In her hands, she carried a small leather-bound ledger, its pages worn smooth by countless evenings of careful notation, and a quill pen that had been her grandmother's before her. The castle's chicken yard occupied a sheltered corner of the inner bailey, protected by high walls on three sides, and overlooked by the tower where her late husband had once kept his study. Now, 5 years after his passing in the Holy Land, Marguerite found solace in the simple rhythms of castle life, and none more so than in the evening count of their feathered charges. As she approached the wooden gate that separated the poultry yard from the main courtyard, she could hear the soft murmuring of the hens as they settled for the night. Brother Thomas, the castle's chaplain who had taken it upon himself to tend the birds during the day, emerged from the small wooden shed where the grain was stored. His brown robes were dusted with straw, and his usually solemn face bore the hint of a smile. Brother Thomas had arrived at the castle 3 winters past, seeking shelter during a particularly harsh season. His knowledge of animal husbandry, gained during his years at the monastery of St. Benedict, had proven invaluable. Under his care, the castle's flock had grown from a modest dozen birds to nearly 40, providing eggs for the household and occasional fowl for feast days. The evening count was a ritual that had evolved naturally between the two of them. While Brother Thomas saw to the practical matters of securing the birds for the night, Marguerite maintained the careful records that her steward required for the castle's accounts. But it had become much more than mere bookkeeping. It was a moment of peace in days often filled with the complexities of managing a castle household. As they entered the yard together, the hens gathered around them with familiar confidence. These were not the wild, skittish birds that might be found in a peasant's yard, but creatures accustomed to gentle handling and regular feeding. Each had been given a name, though Brother Thomas pretended to disapprove of such frivolity, claiming it was unseemly to grow attached to creatures destined for the pot. Marguerite knelt beside the first group of hens, her woolen gown spreading around her like a pool of deep blue water. The fabric was of good quality, but practical, chosen for warmth rather than display. She had learned in the years since her husband's departure that ostentation served little purpose in the daily running of a castle. The first hen to approach was Benedita, a plump red bird with a distinctive white patch upon her breast. She had been named for the saint whose feast day had marked her arrival at the castle as a chick. Benedita settled beside Marguerite with the confidence of a creature long accustomed to gentle treatment, her feathers rustling softly as she tucked her head beneath one wing. Brother Thomas moved methodically through the yard, checking each nest box and ensuring that the evening feed had been properly distributed. His movements were unhurried but purposeful, the result of years spent in monastic life where each task was performed with contemplative attention. As he worked, he spoke softly to the birds, his voice carrying the cadence of prayer even in ordinary conversation. The count proceeded slowly, each bird acknowledged not merely as a number, but as an individual creature under their care. There was Cordelia, an elegant black hen whose glossy feathers caught the last light like polished obsidian. She had produced more eggs than any other bird in the yard, though she had a tendency toward broodiness that required careful management. Near the eastern wall, where the herb garden's lavender and rosemary scented the air, stood Margot, a brown speckled hen who had earned her name through her habit of following Marguerite around the yard like a devoted hound. She was smaller than the others, but possessed of a fierce intelligence that had kept her safe from the occasional fox that might venture too close to the castle walls. As Marguerite made her careful notations, she reflected on how this simple task connected her to the countless generations of women who had managed castle households before her. The keeping of poultry was mentioned in texts that dated back centuries, and she sometimes imagined the ghostly presence of her predecessors, their own ledgers filled with similar tallies of birds and eggs. The mathematics of chicken keeping was more complex than outsiders might suppose. Beyond the simple count of birds, there were considerations of age, productivity, health, and breeding potential. Marguerite tracked which hens were laying regularly, which showed signs of molting, and which might be approaching the end of their productive years. This information guided decisions about culling, breeding, and the purchase of new stock. Brother Thomas had introduced methods he had learned at the monastery, where the keeping of accurate records was considered a spiritual discipline as much as a practical necessity. He had shown Marguerite how to observe the subtle signs of illness or distress in the birds, knowledge that had saved the flock from disease more than once. As they worked, the shadows lengthened, and the castle's evening routines began around them. From the kitchen came the sound of preparations for the evening meal, and somewhere in the upper chambers, a lute player practiced scales with patient repetition. The guards were changing on the walls, their metal-shod feet marking steady time on the stone walkways. Near the wooden shelter where the birds roosted, Marguerite paused to observe a group of younger hens that had been added to the flock in early spring. These pullets, as Brother Thomas called them, were just reaching maturity and had begun to lay their first eggs. Their shells were smaller and paler than those of the older hens, but they represented the future of the flock. Among these younger birds was one that had caught Marguerite's particular attention. She was a golden feathered creature with an unusually calm temperament, content to remain still as Marguerite examined her for signs of health and development. This bird, whom she had named Solange for her sunny coloring, showed promise of becoming one of the flock's finest layers. The evening count provided an opportunity for close observation that the busy daylight hours often prevented. Marguerite noticed that one of the older hens, Gisela, appeared to be limping slightly on her left foot. It was a minor affliction, but one that would require monitoring and perhaps treatment with the healing herbs that Brother Thomas cultivated in a small plot near the chapel. As the sun descended toward the western hills, the birds began their natural progression toward the roost. This was a carefully orchestrated dance, with the older, more dominant hens claiming the choicest spots, while the younger birds found places where they could. Brother Thomas had constructed the roosting area with multiple levels and adequate space for all, reducing the conflicts that might otherwise arise. The roost itself was a masterwork of practical carpentry, built to accommodate the birds' natural instincts while providing protection from predators and weather. Thick wooden beams stretched between sturdy posts, creating perches at varying heights. Below, the floor was covered with fresh straw that was changed regularly to maintain cleanliness and health. Marguerite's count had reached 36 birds, matching the tally from the previous evening. This consistency was reassuring, indicating that the flock remained secure and that no birds had been lost to predators or disease. The castle's cats, while welcome for their skill at controlling rodents, had been trained from kittenhood to leave the poultry alone, a lesson reinforced by Brother Thomas's firm but gentle corrections. As the birds settled for the night, their soft clucking and rustling created a peaceful symphony that seemed to resonate with the castle's ancient stones. This was a sound that had echoed within these walls for generations, a constant thread connecting past and present. Marguerite found it deeply comforting, a reminder that life continued its gentle rhythms, even in times of uncertainty and change. The ledger in her hands contained more than mere numbers. It held the story of the flock's life within the castle walls. Each entry recorded not just a count, but a moment in time, an evening when the world had seemed peaceful and ordered. These records would outlast her own time at the castle, providing guidance for whoever might follow in her role. Brother Thomas secured the gate to the poultry yard with the same care he brought to all his duties. The latch was well oiled and silent, designed not to disturb the settling birds. He had learned to move with economy and grace, understanding that unnecessary noise or sudden movements could upset the delicate balance of the evening routine. As they prepared to leave the yard, Marguerite paused to observe the last light of day painting the castle walls in shades of rose and purple. From this sheltered corner of the courtyard, she could see the great hall's windows beginning to glow with torchlight, and hear the distant sound of voices as the household gathered for the evening meal. The tradition of the evening count had become one of the castle's most cherished rituals, a moment when time seemed to slow and the pressures of daily life receded. It was a reminder that even in a world often dominated by conflict and uncertainty, there remained spaces of peace and continuity. Walking back toward the main castle, Marguerite reflected on how the simple act of caring for these creatures had enriched her understanding of stewardship and responsibility. Each bird in her charge represented a trust, a life that depended upon her wisdom and care. This responsibility was both humbling and deeply satisfying. The castle's evening meal would soon begin, and Marguerite's presence would be expected in the great hall. But she carried with her the peace of the poultry yard, the satisfaction of another successful count, and the knowledge that her charges were secure for another night. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and duties, but for now, all was well within the castle walls. In the growing darkness, the soft sounds of the settling flock provided a gentle counterpoint to the castle's evening routines. Guards called out their watchwords from the walls. Servants moved through the corridors with quiet efficiency. And, somewhere in the distance, a church bell marked the hour of Vespers with its bronze voice. Brother Thomas made his final rounds of the poultry yard, ensuring that all was secure for the night. His prayers, spoken softly as he worked, included petitions for the health and safety of all creatures under his care. This attention to the spiritual dimension of animal husbandry was something he had learned during his monastic years, where all work was considered a form of prayer. The wooden shelters that housed the birds were solidly built and well maintained, designed to provide protection from the weather while allowing adequate ventilation. Each structure had been positioned to take advantage of the natural windbreaks provided by the castle's walls, creating microclimates that remained comfortable even during the harshest winter months. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marguerite closed her ledger and tucked the quill pen into her belt. The day's count was complete, and the records were accurate and up to date. This careful attention to detail was more than mere diligence. It was a form of respect for the creatures in her care, and for the traditions that had shaped castle life for centuries. The relationship between the castle's human inhabitants and their animal charges was one of mutual dependence and care. The birds provided eggs and occasional meat for the table, while the humans offered protection, food, and medical attention when needed. This partnership had evolved over generations, becoming as much a part of castle life as the changing of the guard or the ringing of the chapel bells. In the quiet of the evening courtyard, with the last light fading from the sky and the gentle sounds of the settling birds creating a peaceful backdrop, Marguerite felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Another day had passed successfully. Another evening count had been completed, and all was well within her domain. The castle's poultry yard represented more than mere practicality. It was a symbol of continuity and care, a place where ancient traditions were preserved and honored. Each evening's count was a link in an unbroken chain that stretched back through the centuries, connecting the present moment to all those who had come before. As she prepared to join the household for the evening meal, Marguerite offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the day's blessings and a request for continued protection for all under her care. The simple act of counting chickens had become, over the years, a form of meditation and prayer, a moment of connection with the divine through the care of God's creatures. The gentle twilight settles over these castle walls like a familiar prayer, and as the last of the evening light fades to starshine, another chapter awaits beyond the western towers, where merchants once traveled ancient roads with tales of distant market squares. As the last light fades from thatched roofs and cobblestone paths, the gentle rustle of feathers signals the day's final ritual. In villages where time moves like honey through ancient stones, the evening count of chickens becomes a sacred whisper between earth and sky. The village of Millbrook nestled like a cupped palm in the valley, its thatched cottages breathing softly in the amber light of evening. Sister Marguerite walked the worn path between homes, her wooden staff tapping gently against the cobblestones that had been laid by hands now dust. The air carried the sweet scent of wood smoke and ripening barley, while somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour of vespers with the patience of centuries. She paused at the cottage of Willem the cooper, where a small wooden gate separated his humble dwelling from the communal lane. Behind the weathered fence, 5 hens pecked contentedly at scattered grain, their rust-colored feathers catching the last rays of sunlight that filtered through the oak trees. Willem himself sat on a 3-legged stool, his gnarled hands working slowly to repair a broken barrel hoop, the rhythm of his movements as steady as his breathing. The counting had begun as it always did, with the careful observation that marked the boundary between day and night. Sister Marguerite's eyes, kind and patient from decades of tending to the spiritual needs of the village, took note of each bird. One hen, the color of autumn leaves, stood sentinel near the wooden coop that Willem had built with timber from the great storm 5 winters past. Another, speckled like river stones, scratched at the earth with the methodical persistence of one who understood that sustenance came to those who sought it patiently. The 3rd hen, smallest of the flock, huddled near the water trough that Willem had carved from a single piece of elm. Her feathers bore the soft grey of morning mist, and she moved with the cautious grace of a creature who had learned that the world could be both gentle and harsh. The 4th hen, bold and rust-red, strutted across the yard with the confidence of one who had never known hunger, her comb bright as a cardinal's wing against the growing dusk. The 5th and final hen of Willem's small flock stood apart from the others, her white feathers pure as fresh snow on the abbey steps. She regarded Sister Marguerite with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold knowledge of all the seasons that had passed since she had emerged from her shell in the warmth of the previous spring. Willem looked up from his work, nodding to the nun with the quiet respect that marked all their interactions. 5 again this evening, sister, he said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man whose small corner of the world remained in perfect order. They return as faithful as the sunrise, these ones do. His words fell into the evening air like stones into still water, creating ripples of contentment that spread through the gathering twilight. Sister Marguerite smiled, marking the count. On the wooden tablet she carried, its surface worn smooth by years of such recordings. The numbers she inscribed were more than mere tallies. They represented the continuation of life, the persistent hope that tomorrow would bring another day of simple abundance. Each mark was a prayer written in oak bark and charcoal, a testament to the divine providence that watched over even the humblest of creatures. Moving along the path, she came to the dwelling of Goodwife Eleanor, whose cottage stood slightly apart from the others, surrounded by a garden where herbs grew in neat rows marked by stones from the nearby stream. Eleanor emerged from her doorway as Sister Marguerite approached, wiping her hands on a cloth that had been dyed with berries from the hedgerows. Her face, lined by years of honest labor, brightened with the warmth that comes to those who find joy in simple encounters. Behind Eleanor's cottage, a larger flock moved through the dappled shadows, cast by apple trees heavy with fruit that would soon be gathered for the autumn pressing. 7 hens picked their way through the fallen leaves, their movements creating a gentle rustling that harmonized with the whisper of wind through the branches above. Each bird moved with the unhurried purpose of creatures who understood their place in the rhythm of days and seasons. The largest hen, her feathers the deep brown of rich earth, led the others in their evening forage. She paused frequently to issue soft clucking sounds that seemed to reassure her companions, her maternal instincts extending beyond her own young to encompass the entire flock. A second hen, marked with stripes of gold and amber, followed closely, her head turning constantly as she watched for any sign of danger that might threaten their peaceful gathering. 3 more hens, their feathers ranging from the pale yellow of winter wheat to the deep red of autumn apples, moved in a loose group near the base of the largest apple tree. They pecked at windfalls with the methodical attention of creatures who understood that nothing should be wasted, that every seed and every scrap of fruit represented a gift to be received with gratitude. Their soft sounds of contentment rose into the cooling air like incense from a country altar. The 6th hen, smaller than the others but no less dignified, had found a patch of earth that had been recently turned for Eleanor's winter garden. She scratched at the dark soil with the patient persistence of one who knew that persistence would be rewarded, her movements creating small clouds of dust that caught the light like particles of gold suspended in amber. The 7th and final hen of Eleanor's flock stood watch near the garden gate, her posture alert but peaceful, her presence a living reminder that vigilance and serenity could exist in perfect harmony. Eleanor approached Sister Marguerite with the unhurried grace of one who had learned to find meaning in small rituals. 7 blessings return to roost this evening, sister, she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a woman whose life had found its proper rhythm. Each day they venture forth, and each evening they return, as certain as the turning of the seasons. The nun nodded, adding Eleanor's count to her tablet with the same careful attention she had given to Willem's flock. The numbers grew slowly, each mark representing not just a bird, but a family's security, a community's continuity, a link in the great chain of being that connected earth to heaven. The tablet itself seemed to grow heavier with each mark, weighted, not by physical mass, but by the accumulation of small blessings that comprised the village's evening peace. As the twilight deepened, Sister Marguerite continued her gentle journey through the winding lanes of Millbrook. The cobblestones beneath her feet had been worn smooth by countless footsteps, each stone a testament to the generations who had walked these paths before her. The air grew cooler, carrying with it the promise of dew that would gather on the grass before dawn, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky like scattered grains of wheat against a field of deepest blue. At the cottage of Master Aldrich the carpenter, she found him seated on a bench outside his workshop, his hands still bearing the marks of his trade despite the day's work being done. Shavings of oak and pine curled around his feet like golden snow, and the sweet scent of sawdust perfumed the air with the essence of growing things, transformed by skilled hands into objects of beauty and utility. His chickens, 3 in number, moved through the yard with the measured pace of creatures who understood that haste was seldom necessary and rarely beneficial. The first, her feathers, the colour of fresh cream, pecked delicately at seeds that Aldrich had scattered from his evening meal. Her movements were precise and economical, each gesture serving a purpose, each step taken with the careful consideration of one who understood that grace and efficiency were not opposing forces, but complementary virtues. The second hen, marked with patterns of brown and gold that resembled the grain of fine wood, stood near the workshop door, where the scent of Aldrich's labours lingered like a blessing over honest work. She preened her feathers with the methodical attention of one who understood that proper care was essential to proper function, her beak moving through each feather with the precision that Aldrich himself brought to his carpentry. The third hen, smallest but possessed of a dignity that transcended size, had claimed a spot near the pile of wood shavings where she could scratch and forage while remaining close to the warmth that radiated from the workshop's banked fire. Her rust-coloured feathers caught the glow from the embers within, creating a soft aureole of light that seemed to mark her as blessed among her kind. Aldrich rose from his bench as Sister Marguerite approached, his movements careful and deliberate, as befitted a man whose livelihood depended on the precise control of his physical form. "3 faithful servants return to their rest, sister," he said, his voice carrying the quiet pride of a craftsman who understood that mastery came through the patient accumulation of small perfections. They ask for little and give much, these humble companions. The tablet received another set of marks, each stroke of the charcoal a small celebration of continuity and care. Sister Marguerite paused for a moment, watching as Aldrich scattered. The last of his evening grain, his movements as careful and considered as when he shaped wood into objects of lasting beauty. The chickens responded to his presence with soft sounds of recognition and gratitude, their trust in him as absolute as a child's faith in a loving parent. The path led next to the cottage of Goodman Cedric, whose small holding bordered the stream that provided water for much of the village. The sound of flowing water created a gentle accompaniment to the evening's activities, its voice constant and soothing, as it had been for countless generations before, and would be for countless generations to come. Cedric's cottage stood close enough to the stream that the windows caught the reflection of water and sky, creating patterns of light that danced across the walls like blessings made visible. In the yard behind the cottage, 4 hens moved through, the gathering shadows, with the confident ease of creatures who knew themselves to be safe and valued. The largest, her feathers the deep black of rich soil, stood near the water's edge where a small pool had formed behind a natural dam of stones and fallen branches. She dipped her beak into the clear water with the delicate precision of one performing a sacred ritual, each drink taken with reverence for the gift of sustenance. A second hen, her plumage marked with stripes of white and brown like cream poured into fresh milk, picked her way along the bank where the water had deposited seeds and small treasures from upstream. Her movements created tiny ripples in the still water, each disturbance quickly smoothing away as if the stream itself participated in the evening's gentle restoration of peace and order. The third hen, small and quick, had discovered a patch of ground where the stream's occasional flooding had left particularly rich soil. She scratched at the earth with the enthusiasm of one who understood that abundance often lay just beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered by those willing to search with patience and persistence. Her soft clucking drew the attention of her companions, creating a moment of shared discovery that enriched them all. The fourth and final hen of Cedric's flock stood guard near the cottage door, her posture alert but peaceful as she watched over her companions while they foraged. Her feathers, mottled brown and gold like autumn leaves, seemed to blend with the growing shadows, making her a part of the twilight itself. She represented the wisdom that came from understanding one's role in the larger pattern. The knowledge that individual safety depended on collective watchfulness. Cedric emerged from his cottage carrying a wooden bucket from which steam rose gently into the cooling air. His evening ritual of providing warm water for his flock spoke to the care that marked all his interactions with the creatures under his protection. "4 treasures safe for another night, sister," he said, his voice carrying the contentment of a man whose life had found its proper rhythm. "The stream provides for all who dwell beside it, human and foul alike." Sister Marguerite added Cedric's count to her growing tally, each number representing not just a bird, but a story of care and continuity. The tablet was becoming heavy with accumulated blessings, each mark a testament to the village's dedication to the preservation of life in all its humble forms. She paused to watch as Cedric poured the warm water into a shallow basin, steam rising from its surface like prayers ascending to heaven. The evening census continued as Sister Marguerite made her way to the cottage of Dame Beatrice, whose small dwelling stood at the edge of the village common, where sheep grazed during the day and night brought perfect stillness. Beatrice's cottage was distinguished by the climbing roses that adorned its walls, their blooms long since faded, but their thorny branches still providing structure and beauty that would endure through the coming winter. In the small yard behind the cottage, 6 hens moved with the unhurried grace of creatures who had learned to find contentment in simple pleasures. The first, her feathers the color of polished copper, stood beneath the rose arbor, where scattered petals created a carpet of faded pink and white. She moved through this natural confetti with the dignity of a queen processing through her court, each step deliberate and measured. 2 more hens, their plumage matching like sisters born from the same nest, foraged near the low stone wall that separated Beatrice's yard from the common beyond. Their feathers bore the warm brown of chestnuts fresh from their hulls, and they moved in perfect synchronization, as if connected by invisible threads of understanding and affection. Their soft conversations created a gentle counterpoint to the whisper of wind through the roses. A 4th hen, distinguished by the white patch that marked her breast like a star against the darkness of her other feathers, had claimed the spot near the cottage door where the day's warmth still radiated from, the sun-heated stones. She settled into this warm refuge with the satisfaction of one who understood that comfort was a gift to be appreciated rather than simply expected. The 5th hen, her feathers marked with patterns of gold and black that resembled illuminated manuscript pages, pecked delicately at seeds that Beatrice had scattered from her evening meal. Each grain was received with the gratitude of one who understood that abundance was never to be taken for granted, that each meal was a gift that connected all living things in a web of mutual dependence and care. The 6th and final hen of Beatrice's flock stood near the water trough, her rust-colored feathers catching the last light of day like polished metal. She had positioned herself where she could observe both her companions and the wider world beyond the yard, her presence a reminder that peace required vigilance and that safety was maintained through the careful attention of those who understood their responsibilities to the community. Dame Beatrice appeared in her doorway, her silver hair catching the twilight like spun moonlight. Her hands bore the gentle tremor of advanced years, but her eyes remained bright with the wisdom that came from a lifetime of careful observation and patient tending. 6 blessings return to their rest, sister, she said, her voice carrying the warmth of one who had found deep satisfaction in a life well lived. Each evening they remind me that faithfulness is its own reward. The final marks were added to Sister Marguerite's tablet, completing the evening's census with the same careful attention that had marked its beginning. 25 birds in total had been counted and blessed, each one representing a small but essential link in the great chain of being that connected the humblest creature to the most exalted. The tablet seemed to pulse with accumulated grace, each mark a prayer made manifest in wood and charcoal. As the last light faded from the western sky and the first stars appeared in their eternal patterns overhead, Sister Marguerite made her way back along the village paths toward the small chapel that served Millbrook's spiritual needs. The cobblestones beneath her feet seemed to glow with residual warmth from the day's sun, and the air carried the mingled scents of wood smoke, ripening grain, and the indefinable sweetness that marked the transition from day to night. Behind her, the village settled into its evening rhythm with the practiced ease of a community that had found its proper relationship with the turning of time. Lights began to appear in cottage windows, warm and golden against the gathering darkness, each one a beacon of human presence in the vast mystery of the night. The sound of water flowing over stones provided a constant undertone to the evening's symphony, a reminder that some things endured unchanged through all the turnings of the world. In her small cell beside the chapel, Sister Marguerite placed the tablet on the wooden table that served as her desk, its surface scarred by years of similar recordings. She lit a single candle, its flame steady and bright in the still air, and by its light she reviewed the evening's count. 25 birds safe in their coops, 25 small lives that would greet another dawn, 25 reminders that the great work of creation continued through the faithful attention of ordinary people to ordinary tasks. The numbers on the tablet represented more than a simple inventory. They embodied the village's commitment to stewardship, its understanding that the care of small things was itself a form of prayer. Each mark spoke of a family's dedication to providing shelter and sustenance, of a community's understanding that individual prosperity was meaningless without collective security. The tablet had become a sacred text written in the humble language of daily devotion. As she prepared for her own evening prayers, Sister Marguerite reflected on the day's census and found in it a perfect example of how the divine made itself known through the ordinary routines of rural life. The chickens had returned to their roosts as they did every evening, guided by instincts older than human memory, yet sustained by human care. Their faithful return was both natural law and small miracle, a reminder that creation itself was built on foundations of trust and reciprocal care. The candle flame flickered slightly as a gentle breeze found its way through the gaps in the stone walls, causing shadows to dance across the tablet's marked surface. In that play of light and darkness, Sister Marguerite saw reflected the larger rhythms that governed all life: the daily cycle of light and shadow, the seasonal progression of planting and harvest, the eternal dance of death and renewal that marked the passage of years and generations. Outside the chapel, the village of Millbrook settled into the deep peace that came with the knowledge that another day had been completed successfully, that all who were meant to be safe were indeed safe, that the small corner of creation entrusted to their care remained in good order. The chickens slept in their coops, their soft breathing creating clouds of warmth in the cooling air, their presence a gentle reminder that security was built through the accumulation of countless small acts of faithfulness and care. Sister Marguerite extinguished the candle and knelt for her final prayers of the day, her words of gratitude rising into the darkness like incense from an invisible altar. She gave thanks for the 25 birds safely counted, for the families who cared for them, for the village that provided the community within which such care could flourish. Her prayers encompassed all the small blessings that comprise the day's abundance, each one a note in the great hymn of creation that played eternally in the background of conscious existence. In the silence that followed her prayers, the village seemed to breathe with the collective rhythm of all its sleeping inhabitants, human and animal alike. The sound of the stream continued its eternal conversation with the stones, and somewhere in the distance, a night bird called softly to its mate. These sounds wove together into a lullaby that had been sung over Millbrook for centuries, a gentle song that would continue long after the current generation had joined their ancestors in the quiet sleep that awaited all who lived faithfully within the great pattern of creation. The tablet lay on the table, its marks catching occasional glints of starlight that filtered through the window. Tomorrow would bring another evening census, another careful counting of small blessings, another opportunity to participate in the ancient ritual that connected human care to divine providence. The numbers would change slightly as the seasons turned, but the essential pattern would remain. Faithful creatures returning to faithful caregivers, trust rewarded with security, care repaid with continuity. And so the evening ended as it had begun, with the quiet satisfaction that came from tasks completed and responsibilities fulfilled. The village slept, the chickens roosted, and the eternal wheel of day and night continued its ancient rotation, carrying all of creation forward into whatever blessings the morning might bring. In this small corner of the world, peace reigned supreme, built on foundations of mutual care and sustained by the patient accumulation of countless small acts of love. A soft thank you to you, the listener, for journeying with us through these quiet tales of medieval devotion and care. If you're new here, we'd love to have you subscribe so you never miss a story. May your own rest be as peaceful as these evening countings, and may tomorrow's light find you renewed and gentle.